All right, we live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to what will be a very exciting session. We've got the wonderful Dr. Susan Sharpe here with us, and we'll do a bit of a formal intro just in very shortly. I might just cover off, hopefully you all know why you're here, which is for the session today on how to embed PD into practice and lessons from excellent services in the latest research. Just before we dive in, wanted to do a quick acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we work and live on, honouring their elders past, present and emerging. We respect the deep connections Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have with country and commit to learning from their wisdom as we build our shared future. So as most of you know, we're Mana and we're committed to ensuring that every child has an extraordinary start to life. And we run these sort of webinars as free PD for the sector. We also just wanted to just a couple of notes on housekeeping. Please use the chat to ask any questions. We really want to keep this positive, so please, upvote people that you love their comments on. Keep the chat really inspiring. And this will be recorded and you can watch it after. And we'll also have a couple polls in the session as well. So on that note, we're here with the wonderful Dr. Susan Sharpe. Susan, big thank you for joining us. And maybe for those that don't know you, first to just kick off and hear a little bit more about kind of yourself, your journey in ECEC and what lights you up.
Oh, thanks, Aiden. Thanks for having me and just meeting with you from the land of the Kabi Kabi people from the Sunshine Coast. And I would like to add my voice to the acknowledgement of country that Hayden has already done and extend that very respect to the lands from which you are connecting today. My name is Susan Sharpe. I am an educator, a mother, a teacher, a friend. I go by many lenses and a researcher. So today I'm very privileged to be able to share with you about a topic that is so close to my heart and I'm very, very passionate about, which is professional learning and successful implementation of professional learnings.
Awesome. Yeah, we're very excited to dive in, Susan. Also, Susan, might see, is it possible if you can shift your chair to the left just a little bit so you're a little bit more in the middle for people? Kind of, or just a tiny bit? Yeah,
All right.
perfect. Now everyone can see you. Awesome. Great. Well, we're obviously Susan has had an incredible career, and we're very fortunate to have her today. For those that probably signed up, you probably saw Susan's bio and it sort of speaks for itself. But Susan's had a long career in early childhood and has pioneered a lot of really interesting research. And she does that through her university roles, but also is a part of C&K and drives a lot of the research agenda there. So we're very lucky to kind of talk about a very interesting piece of research today, which is around how to embed professional development. Now, I think just to set the scene for everyone, and this is the thing I'm keen to talk to you about, Susan, like we know right now, quality is so critical in our sector. The sector's facing a lot of headwinds. There's a lot of skill shortages, also, more sort of public scrutiny. And it's really more important than ever to really demonstrate to society the value of early learning and empower our educators to do so. And so right now, we're hearing a lot of groups really invest in professional development and upskilling and, running a lot of PDs. But would love to hear your thoughts on like what is often missed in that and how do we actually make sure that actually gets realized? And can you give us a bit of the context of why you decided to dive into this research pillar?
That's a really, really good question. And I do talk a lot about it in my PhD thesis, my why. When I arrived at this particular focus area or topic, I used to be a regulatory officer. So I had the privilege of visiting many centers. To do assessment and rating, to talk to educators about their professional learning journeys, and what I discovered or what inspired me to choose this particular topic is that a lot of educators will used to talk to me about what professional learning they had attended and how great it was, but that extra piece of what they did with it after, and how they sustained it and how it transformed was always patchy. So I thought, okay, there is a gap there in the sector. I think it would be really, really good to start building skills beyond just knowledge acquisition to implementing successfully. So that is my why. Plus, also, I've been in the education sector for a long time, working in a variety of advisory roles. I've always been a big believer in the fact that professional development, which is uh, a must. We've always embraced professional development. The only difference now is that there is such a big uptake and appetite for it, and we're very, very lucky and privileged that we've moved from not having so much to having so much. But back to my point of what I've always believed in is that professional development only demonstrates its real value when it is embedded into daily routines and practice and pedagogy and decision making.
That's great. And what are kind of the telltale signs that if you were to go into a center and see that learning really isn't embedded? Like, what does performative PD look like? How do you kind of tell if you were to walk in a center?
Well, it would depend. It would really, really depend. But anything that moves beyond performative is it transfuses into everything. You would hear people talking about it. You'd be able to see it. You There would be lots of evidence. It would be ongoing. There will be that segment of continuation, knowledge revival, um, remembering, and but also demonstrating this is what we did. So there are so many indicators of what um, is successful implementation is. Some of them can be very staff oriented, some of them can be contextual, leadership oriented, like I'll be talking about one of the key findings from my research, what I wrote a paper about, and I think you're very interested in that paper, Aidan, is the leadership. Leaders will be able to speak to it. You'll be able to see it in staff professional learning plans. It basically, that concept of embedment is everywhere. It's just everywhere. If you walked into a center that really has strong transfer practice.
Yeah, that's a great point because I think what I often see a lot in our sector is educators are very quick to want like their certificate of a PD that they've done.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
like that's like this quick dopamine hit. It's like, yeah, cool, I've done a PD, but like you said, like really it just doesn't stop at the certificate. It really should be in
yeah.
conversation. Like, the leaders understand it. And that everyone comes away from that feeling energized to actually put that into practice.
Absolutely. And I always share that the key areas of uh, really good transfer will show you that there is people have outsourced that knowledge, they have acquired it, which is what we call they're satisfied with it. But then you would see the critical behaviors as well that are coming out of that particular knowledge, and the critical behaviors are essentially the implementation.
Mm,
You would see that people are really doing. The doing is happening. It's not only happening in one room or with one person, it's happening across the board. And I think that's what the NQS identifies as embedded. Everyone doing and everyone speaking, uh, not the same but similar language.
mm, that's great. Yeah, and I kind of want to move into that because you've obviously codified a lot of that thinking into a really great framework, which you call the meta strategic leadership sort of.
Hmm.
It's five key pillars. Can
Mm.
you walk us through those five key pillars at a higher level, and then we can double click into each one, and I might just drill down and ask some questions. But can you give a broad overview of like where you landed, how you categorize those pillars?
So, what I found, there are two aspects to my findings. One was the we will talk about this later, the process of putting knowledge into action. And then the other one was the enablers of successful knowledge transfer. So what I found is that one of the key enablers is meta-strategic leadership, which was very surprising to me as well, because it's easy to think that the doing is a good enabler. Yes, that's a big enabler. But what I identified was that it was the pillar. Everything else was wrapped underneath it, all around it. So by meta strategic leadership is kind of a new term, generally new, and it combines the term meta and strategic. So basically, it has a blend of multiple skills and abilities, and also that ability to be very foresighted, hence the term meta strategic. So you don't get trapped up into this form of leadership. You just strategic. You just identify what needs to be done, and you do it the best way that you can do it. So that's what informed that framework. And the 5 pillars of vision, you got to be very clear at an individual level and also at a collective level as a team of your vision. That's your long-term goals that guide how you set up yourself for professional learning and what you even believe about putting knowledge into action. For instance, I don't believe I can put everything into action. I just believe that I can prioritize what is important and essential and is manageable. So that's a personal vision. And I wanted to share also that vision is not something that people do for you. When we speak in the context of successful knowledge transfer and all meta strategic leadership, vision is something you build with time. As you learn, you become more competent. As you draw on the skills and the abilities of others, your vision shapes and reshapes and refines, and it changes every day. So that's a long-term goal that guides how your knowledge is applied or how you inform what kind of knowledge you acquire. Then there is that pillar of shared beliefs and values and identity. So vision can start with the individual and then become a collective, but shared beliefs are more about together, we as a team here at the center, all in this organization. What do we believe about knowledge? What do we believe about transformational practice? What values underpin what we do? Who are we, or who do we want to be in the next um, 2, 3 years? And I know this can be a tricky question because work in a sector where we have a lot of staff at Trion, but later on we'll be talking about other pillars that underpin this framework where the shared values become a binding factor, so and shared identity, so much so that when you have your welcomes that bring people on board, they're going to be easily adapted into those shared values, beliefs, and identity. And they're going to be able to add value to them. So it's a transient space, but it's a really big driver of successful knowledge transfer. I'm just going to pause a bit there just to give people some time, just because it's a lot of information to put together.
Yeah, no, good. And I think that's like the kind of the North Star of it in sort of my reading of it, which I think is something I often see missed, where there isn't a real strategy around professional development. And it's like, cool, here's another webinar we can go attend. Here's another webinar. Hey,
Yes.
go
Yeah.
this one. And then we're collecting certificates, but we don't have like a vision of what it's working towards. And I think this takes like quite a lot of deliberate sit down
Oh,
time.
yes.
Because, where I imagine if to do this well, you have to sit down, look at, okay, what are the strengths of our team? What are some of the areas for growth? And then work out, okay, it sounds like this is the most important factor. And what's been interesting to see across the sector right now, Susan, keen to get your views on this, is that child safety has been enforced from the government as a clear vision for how they want services to, and it's almost given services now a bit of purpose in their PD. And I see a lot of services that are signing up to child safety professionals,
Yeah.
but that's mandated by the government. and there's probably a lot of other things that people can explore. But it
Yeah.
sounds like a lot. That's often what people miss as the first step is like, actually, what's your North Star and how do you work towards that?
Absolutely. And then you can see that when I talk about that framework, there is a lot of, you can see that there is a vision, there is shared beliefs that we believe in as practitioners, everybody in the sector, that we want our children to be safe. And thank you for using that example. We have shared values about child safety. You can see the configuration design. This is a really good, was a very good discovery for me around this framework. Deliberately designing how learning will come back into action. That's something that people tend to overlook when they're thinking professional learning. They want to go and get the knowledge, but they don't think about the after piece. And also systems of action. I think you can tell, drawing on that very example that the government have done, we know what it could look like in those modules, what it could look like in practice, um, and what so basically speaking, systems and actions is a critical enabler, and that piece also pivots on leadership as well, because an educator might not be able to set that up. If you would looking at consistency and embeddedness, that needs to be at a whole service level. And then
Mm,
the last bit of sustaining knowledge, keeping
mm.
the knowledge alive. Yep.
And I have one of the excellent services. I know you did a lot of this research with excellent services
Mm,
that I've had the pleasure of visiting is Winston Glades. Shout out to the team there if they're watching.
mm,
It's one of the things that really struck me when I was chatting with Lisa, who's the centre director there, was she was mentioning that shared beliefs and values, the importance of really holding each other accountable and setting a
mm,
high standard, but also
mm,
making sure we have high support. And I was
mm,
curious because I know that a lot of services that I talk to struggle to maintain the standard because it is such a tough profession. Things change daily. Children,
mm,
they're not predictable. You can't just sit down for a 9 to 5 and do your desk job. Things are
mm,
always changing, and so particularly when that's happening in the services, people are tired or they're burnt out, and then it's quite easy to go, oh, okay, this time don't worry so much about doing your reflection on that professional development. It's okay, we'll leave it for another time. But then
mm.
those things can slip over time. So how would you advise people that, on how do you maintain that balance of high standards and high support, but also acknowledging some of the difficulties with actually doing this at such a high degree of quality?
Yeah, and again, this is something that can be very contextual. I can name a few pillars. Like I say, when you build systems and not target one-off events, um, people will have some particular practices that will support them through that will support them to negotiate those challenges. Anything we do in the early childhood sector has challenges. It's not just PD, it's everything that we do. Setting up your routines may have challenges, supervision may have challenges, but identifying what would really work and sitting as a team and asking ourselves, okay, this is what we know might happen. And I think in my book, I talk about doing a risk assessment around your knowledge transfer. That's all part of the planning cycle and thinking, okay, we've decided to commit this amount to this much, but how are we going to sustain it? How are we going to ensure that learning that we've acquired is revisited consistently, and that it's not lost and it's not a one-off? What practical strategies? In fact, as I'm reading through my book this morning and I'm thinking, one of the key uh, gold nuggets I highlight there is going even as far as thinking, what would happen to this knowledge if this person left? And that's a question we don't think about very often.
Mm,
So when you think in terms of sustaining that knowledge, you prompted to think, okay, what if we did not have Susan here? What systems have we got in place to make sure that the knowledge or the way of doing or the key behaviors that she's acquired from that PD do stay here and become part of our everyday business as usual work. And that's a very uncomfortable uh, question to address, because it's not easy, but that's where your sustainability, your embedding, the planning and doing and reviewing cycles, that's where your regular reflection, they sit all in all that space of let's find ways of sustaining this beautiful knowledge, because sustaining it also means you could get to a point in time where the value of that knowledge expires, because if you're a research-based organization, nothing stays the same forever. And we're very lucky in the sector that, yes, on one hand we challenge, but on the other hand is that practices, pedagogy is developing every day. People are discovering new ways of doing things. And I think you could speak to that even from an IT perspective. Um, but the key question to ask is, what practical things can we as leaders do so that learning does not walk out of that door when that person leaves?
Yeah, that's great. So to play that back, it's like once you sort of first sort of set your vision, understand what you stand for, the beliefs that you want to kind of enable within the team. If you
Mm-hmm.
kind of get that right, then the next bit is how do you design a system that's sort of more like a closed loop system
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that people then that accountability comes more natural, because like you said, if it's a bit one off and it's not thoroughly planned, then it's very easy to miss doing a reflection on your PD because
Mm.
it's like a one-off thing that people do on occasion. Whereas if you have designed a system where, okay, we're doing professional development, everyone does their reflections, then in three weeks' time we have a staff meeting to discuss it. Then we're going to have a community of practice with the other center down the road that's a part of our brand. Like if you build like a system, then it's like all funneled through that. Is that kind
Mm-hmm.
of fair playback?
Yes, and it can work at a center level. It can work that way, exactly that way. But also, from remember, in the early childhood sector, we live on welcomes and goodbyes. People have there's a lot of movement.
Mm,
Um, but let's hypothetically assume this would be the ideal situation, but not the real situation. That
mm,
you have your service aid, and you've put all these systems in place. You've done knowledge audits. You know exactly what each person's strengths are. You've blended that knowledge, infused it within the way of doing, and everyone knows what to do. If I walked in there, I would know exactly what underpins your practice around observing children's learning, what informs it. I would know what professional learning stuff I've undertaken, and what how it's being sustained and what frameworks they're using to sustain it.
mm,
Similar to me, when I move out to go to another center, hypothetically speaking, they had really robust systems like that. That
mm,
knowledge I have is not lost, because at the end of the day, professional learning, although it's consumed at an individual and sometimes whole team level, it benefits the person, the educator, me, myself, and the children and the families. So no matter where I am, there's always going to be a benefit to that. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's really going to be essential for us to move past staff movement as a barrier. It's not a barrier, it's actually an opportunity for that knowledge to be extended and broadened. The barrier is in the fact that the systems sometimes within individual centers, this is what my research showed me, are not set up to support that moving around. So that there is it's looked at more as a benefit than a gain. And that doesn't mean that sometimes you won't get staff who are not trained in particular sets of knowledge. But if you already know and you have systems, you have knowledge reservoirs, you have an onboarding framework that exposes them to that knowledge, then there is nothing to worry about, because you start operating from this is how we do things, not this is who does things here. So you move beyond the person to the knowledge, the practices, to the outcomes for children and families. Does that
mm.
make sense?
Yeah, I think the thing that would probably be really interesting to unpack is maybe, um, yeah, an example of how, like, what might be an initial step to take towards that. Because I think there's right now, what I hear a lot of is that, educators are very time poor. They're really struggling. Documentation is a constant pain.
Yeah,
Um, and, I can imagine some people thinking, this sounds really great, but then if I've got to write down everything I'm learning, put it down somewhere,
yeah,
like this is more time, which I don't have.
yeah.
So, what do you kind of suggest to those people on that journey who are maybe kind of in this burnout phase and like they just can't see a path of how they could free up time and space for this sort of work to design this to contribute to it meaningfully? What would you say to those sort of people who might be in that
Well, I would
mental?
say that it's okay to worry about things like that. I would firstly want to acknowledge that that's a reality of what we are working with. We
Mm.
working with multiple competing priorities, and I do have a few tips later on around that. But before I
Yeah.
share those tips, for me, what I wanted to encourage people who will be viewing and listening today is before you even go there, because it's so easy to get trapped up into the barriers and challenges, some of which are never gonna be go away because it is the reality of life. But every time you attend a PD, and starting with this one, because I'm sure there are many people who are here because it's a professional development opportunity, is to
Mm.
think, especially from a leadership point of view, think think beyond initial rollout. Like I know everybody here is going to leave. They will take away something. I would like to think so. And
Mm.
probably they'll be inspired to roll it out. But then when you think beyond initial rollout, because in professional learning we have what we call the PD high. People get
Mm.
very, very, very excited. And I'm one of those people when I attend a really good conference or a good session. I get very excited and I'm on my high and I have all these things that I would like to do and I plan to do, and sometimes I'm not able to do all that. Um, but I think that the thing to think about is what's the one thing that I can take away from here. And I always emphasize just find a quick win, something that's going to take you not more than 2 days to fix. So that's your starting point. And while you mellow on that, think about what else beyond what else do I want to, and and that's at an individual level, but at a collective level in my process for successful knowledge transfer, I do encourage and advocate for sense making. As a team, sit down and have a yarn, have a conversation,
Mm.
debrief, and identify key priority areas that you want to implement. When you want to implement those, who will be responsible for what. So there is a lot of intentionality that goes into successful knowledge transfer.
Mm.
And and also I think the other question that you were asking me, how do you advise what message will you have for someone who is feeling very, very overwhelmed? And I always say I would tell that person that not all knowledge has to be acted upon. Don't let the bulkness of the information, for instance, I share today or Aiden shares overwhelm you. Just start with the single most important shift you want to make.
Mm.
The sing the for ask yourself, why did I even come to this training? What is the single most important shift that I wanted to make or wanted to learn? And
Mm.
that already creates boundaries over what you're going to take away and what you're going to act on.
That's fantastic, Susan. I just did a quick poll as well, just for the audience and for those maybe haven't filled it out. I could get a sense of how well people feel like PD is embedded into practice at your services, and a lot of people more in that sort of okay and poor sort of bracket. And I think they're probably in that space where even though Susan is talking about this framework of what excellent services look like that's a journey, and just taking steps on that journey and thinking about just, yeah, what's I love that tip. I think that's a very quotable quote, and I'm sure that's somewhere in your book. But not all knowledge has to be acted upon, and start with, what is the most important shift. And so I really like that point. And I think I was curious to kind of get your thoughts too, like on what are some examples that people might be able to get like a real understanding for those that haven't even seen what best practice could look like, and maybe they're just at
Mm,
the stage of doing, I could do a reflection on a PD on a certificate that I have. But what are
mm,
some really cool examples that you've seen in these excellent services of systems of action, like tangible things like ebooks, community of practice, or what are some
yeah.
ones you've seen?
Oh, yeah. Actually, thank you for asking me that question. I think some of the things that I have seen, there's quite a lot of good things. And I just wanted to reassure everybody that even though what are some of these examples that I found are very cool, eh, good practice is very contextual and contextually driven. So we really have to be cognizant of the fact that what might work in one service might not be fully applicable into another one. Some of the practices that I'm going to talk to might work better in one service but not another. So in my book, I talk about uh, enablers, and one of the enablers is implementation support practitioners. These are the people who support others to put their learnings into action. And that's a piece that I found that can be missed when you're
Mm,
just an educator going for PD and you come back, you've been away from your center for 3 days, you've been bombarded with a lot of wonderful ideas that you still have these responsibilities to come back to that are waiting for you. It can be a bit challenging to then reframe your mindset to the new knowledge. So you start chipping away slowly, and sometimes um, packing a lot of knowledge. But if we thought about systems and structures, and we had a really good system for implementation support, these are the go-to people that we need in our day-to-day life to make sure that we can put our learnings into action. And what I found is that they don't necessarily have to be subject matter experts. They can be gifted in other areas, like they can be IT experts and all that. So that's a really big piece of cool stuff that I found. Another example was people. This was really humbling for me because when we talk about PD, professional learning, successful knowledge transfer, we tend to think in terms of knowledge and systems, but behind everything, successful knowledge transfer pivots on people and human beings. I found that centers where there was a lot of respect and love and care and value of each other, and these were like really simple things like, oh, the service provider bakes us a cake each time it's our birthday. They do these, those things were really good minutia. They were like very simple, easy to identify enablers. And also systems for acknowledging, and I know you spoke about certificates like earlier, but
mm,
authentic systems for acknowledging in a way that's visible.
mm,
Because if I pack away my certificate, who
mm,
else is gonna see that I was really given that acknowledge for being so good into that? So again, thinking beyond and that's why I called it beyond acquisition, beyond what you're doing now, beyond what else could it look like, having those conversations and thinking about what will work for us, how are we going to do this. So there were knowledge reservoirs was a really good one, finding platforms where people can go back and revisit that knowledge, and creating time for people to revisit that knowledge
mm,
that's not revisited can be lost in translation, and it
mm,
becomes once upon a time.
mm.
um yeah, so uh,
Wonderful.
opportunities for people to try and fail. We tend to believe that everything has to be perfect and has to be landed at the right time. but being comfortable with a fail, um, and also peer supports, peer scaffolds. I think one of the things that I found in the centers was they were pairing up educators in a respectful way, pairing them up. Not that one was deficit, but you can look at people with different strength, and that might be logistically impossible to do depending on resources. But
Mm.
hey, we can dream about all these things and then go back and say what's achievable for us and what's not achievable. So a lot of those things I have talked about are mostly at the practical level, the educator practical level.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Oh, really good. I might actually drill into a couple of those. So, the one I liked, yeah, was the acknowledgement of what, like making PD visible. So whether it be a staff board of people saying what they've done, or putting up a reflection on the staff board, having more, creating that culture around learning and forming conversations. I think,
Mm,
obviously we're in the sort of technology space, and one thing I know you've seen kind of within our platform is how when in our kind of professional development side of it, we really have our webinars and things we have like front and center, to really just nudge people towards like what are some other things that they can explore. Um,
mm,
and, I think that's a big thing that, is also the physical space has a role to play in. So
mm,
I've been into some awesome centers that really
mm,
take the effort to put things up on walls to change the environment, and it really, is such a powerful medium to inspire people around what could be. So
yeah.
I love that one. And the other one, that I think is really interesting, the strength side of things, which, yeah, often gets missed, is, because I sort of studied my master's in positive psychology, where a big thing is like, how do you embed strength-based practices? Because a
Mm-hmm,
lot of our human bias is focused on kind of, we have a negativity bias, we want to solve problems.
mm,
If we follow, strengths, we can create more of a positive spiral around that, particularly when shaping culture. And so I
mm,
like that idea of like taking the time to understand your team, what are some of their strengths, pairing people up that maybe have different
mm,
strengths so that they can learn from each other. And I think there's a big, role in rostering and hiring, just to kind of
mm.
have a bit more of that language come through.
Yeah.
And about the mix of your team. And there's a few, we did a webinar a couple of weeks ago, which was with Sandy Phoenix, where she sort of sent through a link on the strengths character assessments and stuff like that. But I hadn't thought about that I thought that mostly from a culture lens, but from a professional development lens, absolutely love that one. And then I just had a question. This implementation support practitioner, is that a role, or is that like an educator that is like the champion of that? Like I know some groups have educators that are their child safety champion, or
Mm.
what is that role? Is it like an additional kind of thing that you see people doing? What's the scope of that?
So the scope with that, firstly, we I don't want anyone to really get lost into the language. It's more about what people do. There's the designated to do as opposed to a title. Uh,
Mm,
when you, let's say, an implementation support practitioner or a person designated with implementation support responsibilities is the person, your go-to person. It's your
mm,
go-to person to support you. And I think it really helps to involve them very early in the transfer process, in that
mm,
planning, when you're identifying your knowledge needs,
mm,
identifying where you're going to get that knowledge and when, and who is going to be part of that knowledge acquisition. It's there involved so that when you come back, and this can sound a little bit tokenistic, but if you come back, it's really good to have a little plan. It's very good to have a little plan. And I always tell people that when you come back, you're going to sit down and you can, if you have the opportunity, it can be the colleague next door who is so good at pulling things out and making them more manageable. So when you come back, you sit down with your person or you pull that and say, look, what learning deserves my attention from all this? right? What really deserves my attention? So you pivot back on your goals, your need, why you even went there. And this is why I always tell people it's good to be inspired by externally driven factors, but go back to your why. What's most important to you? What's your philosophy? What's something that's going to benefit you as an individual educator, even without leadership support or whatever? So if you go back, you're like, okay, this is all the learning that I took away from this webinar with Aiden and Susan. But does everything has does everything they've spoken about, does it need, will it impact, does it deserve my attention in this place and time, or will it deserve my attention over a sustained period of time? Because everything we discussed here is really impactful long term. But then you're like, okay, a practical question to ask, out of all this, what's the most important thing that will build me over time that I would really want to revisit? And what's the thing that's going to help me think differently, act differently, understand my colleagues and children and families, or practice more differently? And how can I turn this insight into small actionable steps?
Yeah,
Right?
that's great.
So you're moving away from this big knowledge. You're going back to your why, but then you're also creating boundaries along the way on how to manage this oyster of knowledge.
Yeah.
So that way you avoid doing too much at once. The problem always lies in wanting to do too much at once with everybody. People are already constrained. They're tired. It's that time of the year where we have so much on. So making it manageable, bite-sizable implementation is what I would call it. Does help. I don't know if
Yeah.
that answers your question. So yeah,
No, that.
implementation support practitioners are those
Yeah.
people you can go to and say, look, this is what I got. How can you help me unpack this into some more manageable pieces?
Yeah, cool. So that might be like your ed leader may kind of play that
Yeah,
role.
ed
The,
leader can be your pedagogy advisor, can be, depends. People have different languages, can be your curriculum advisor. People, one thing we're lucky in Australia is that everybody has different language around their support people. But for me, I'm even thinking it could be as simple as that colleague of yours that you always sit down and have that professional conversation with. Someone that really engages. And I always emphasize the informal people, not the formal ones, because successful knowledge implementation support practitioners not necessarily subject matter experts. They don't have to. They One of the things I talk about in my book, they are going to be people who are willing to enable others to succeed, people who are willing to listen, people who are willing to ponder a situation with you over time and support you to navigate. Not, they don't give you answers, they don't take over, they don't put deadlines for you, but they might arrive, help you, nudge you into a gentle space where you can be comfortable with that overwhelming knowledge.
That's really good. And I think like I love that point on the implementation support practitioner. Not having to think people think, oh God, now I need to hire another person and put them on the books. Like it's just, it could be as simple as, well, it could be another person, or it could be as simple as, a colleague that informally you kind of bounce ideas off and try
Yeah.
and help each other with. And you'll probably find when you do, I imagine when groups do that kind of strength assessment, they might find people that are just really good people that are great at chatting and great at listening to others, and that's a real strength that they could use for that. I think that's really cool, and I think in this, we're sort of obviously in the technology world, but I think we've even been thinking through that with. And I know there was a question in our chat around how does Mana embed PD, and thanks Jennifer. Your question, I just shot the 5 key areas, and we'll show Susan's book, which has that in the future as well. Sorry, in a couple of slides. But yeah, for us, like how are we thinking about it from a technology lens is we have Coach Sue, who's like a mini ed leader, an AI coach,
Mm,
um, that educators, that use us, like bounce ideas off Sue to kind of unpack
mm,
learning. And I think where you might not have access to a person because of, I don't know, ratios or
mm,
issues there are some other solutions like technology, and that's one
mm,
that's been really interesting to see in this AI world is because AI can be trained and fine-tuned to understand, different pedagogical concepts, and it's dynamic.
mm,
We can actually have another way to just try and democratize knowledge. So that's just one angle that we've found really interesting. That's helped
mm.
embed PD, and there's the human and side is irreplaceable, but for us we see this future of which is kind of like what you spoke about, Susan, of like that systems of action, but
Mm,
configuration design is like people process tech, like in our
mm,
perspective, and how, because documentation is a form of technology, whether that's on paper or whether that's writing about it, and even this part I was keen to dig into kind of knowledge reservoirs and what you mean by that, and how you've seen that done well, because that's not
yeah,
something I see often done. And is that things like, if you came up with a great planned experience for a group of children that went really well, you create like a bank of different things. I know people use like lots of learning games, like those that may follow the adversarial approach, they have like libraries for learning games. What do you mean by knowledge reservoirs and
yeah.
how?
So from a professional development point of view, and I talk a lot about knowledge reservoirs in my first paper, which I really published shortly after doing my literature review. Knowledge reservoirs are any places you're gonna, they're repositories. uh, what I found, what was a discrepancy, is that when people attend really good PD, everyone makes their own notes,
Mm,
and they come back and their notes stay in their notebook, and other people do recordings. So um, there's a whole piece about how you document the knowledge from PD, not how you implement it, because that's a critical enabler. But what
mm,
we found is another good layer I found in some of these bespoke services is that they reposit, they come after sense making and agreeing to how contextually this might look like for them. Then they kind of reposit their key agreement somewhere in an accessible space. It could be their community of practice forum, or it could be, these days technology has gone so far away. People have different spaces where they reposit, but that what makes, and they do reposit that with even visuals, so that if new educators come on board, they're oriented in through that particular knowledge. They know what it looks like. If educators leave, that knowledge is kept somewhere, so that the reservoirs are part of the systems. Look at it in terms of like a water reservoir, where you have a big rainwater tank, for instance, like here in my house. When I don't have water, I will never run out of water because I have the reservoir there. So when it rains, it keeps adding to my reservoir. When I need to use, I go and take away and water my garden, do whatever I need to take away, but I keep replenishing on the reservoir. And everyone in my house has access to that reservoir, right? So knowledge reservoirs also operate in a similar way. They have to be maintained, for starters. There are some examples people can use, but again, it depends. I would say one of the key aspects that I really found was to keep it simple, make the reservoirs simple, update them, take out as much when knowledge supersedes its value. Like knowledge does come to a time where it's no longer relevant, then you
mm,
need to replenish. You need to go back, do more PD, or refresh, or do whatever you need to do to make sure that you are up to date with the current practice. Something I wanted to pivot on to as well, that
mm,
you mentioned earlier on, about implementation support practitioners, that I found was really good, and maybe this was prior to AI, was in this particular center. It was a very big center with about, let's say, 30 staff, and they had all buddied up for to be somebody else's implementation support practitioner. So that
Mm,
already built a sense of trust within the center, in that power was not shifted to one person, it wasn't shifted, but they all had a chance at supporting each other. So you would be my implementation support practitioner, but then you would also have another implementation support practitioner. So everybody gets practice to do that, and opportunity to do that peer coaching and peer support and peer scaffolding. So already that balances the equation, so that you don't have hierarchy in knowledge, but you're drawing on expertise and trust. Yeah.
mm. What do you mean by not having hierarchy in knowledge?
Well, it is good to have hierarchy in terms of governance, and I talk about knowledge governance in my book. But also, one of the barriers we identified was positioning one person as the know-it-all, unless you give them the skills to be
Mm,
really good mentors and practitioners. And a practitioner, like I said, an implementation practice support implementation support practitioner does not have to be a subject matter expert. Even
mm,
when they are, it's not about what they know, it's also about how they make the other person want to learn from them.
mm,
So knowledge hierarchy comes in a way that when people play to the position, and in their being in that position impacts knowledge flow within the center, just because there isn't enough humility or buy-in from other people to want
mm.
to work with them. So
That
that's
makes
what we call knowledge hierarchy. It's not a bad thing if it's used very well, but it
mm.
can also be a breaking factor if it's not used very well.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And I think that ties in nicely with what you spoke about around the knowledge reservoirs. I know I've seen some groups that have some really good examples of having sort of somewhere where they store their, great kind of learning plans that they've implemented or
Mhm.
different projects that they've done.
Yeah,
Everyone can kind of look up and tap into. And that's
yeah.
a thing that we're really excited about also in this AI future. That one challenge with those things right now is they're often stored away somewhere and it's really hard to filter through it all, or it's sometimes difficult to access. And one thing that's really cool is now, because AI can actually learn about your knowledge reservoir and learn about the preferences of an individual,
Mm,
that we have these more dynamic knowledge libraries. So if you upload all these case studies and ask it a question on, hey, is there something here related to nature play with children between 3 to 4? And
mm,
then it can actually search that knowledge base and return that information. So one thing
mm,
we've seen in this new future of knowledge reservoirs is how they become more dynamic and
mm,
make it more accessible for people.
mm,
But because there is a barrier right now, if you do have all these massive backlogs of all these things you've done, sifting through it, knowing what's relevant to you.
mm,
So that's also a really cool trend that I think in that knowledge reservoir space is something that we've just seen as well.
mm.
But we're just coming up to time, so I might just throw. Does anybody have any questions for Susan? I know this has been quite a long chat, and what we will in her book, she does unpack the framework a bit more, and we'll show that shortly. But no, I guess same sort of thing as Susan mentioned. Don't feel like you have to understand this whole world. Susan spent what? How many years doing the PhD?
About 10 years unpacking all this. So yeah,
So,
take it in small bits. Yeah, pick away just one thing that's gonna small insight, one small insight.
yep. Any questions from anyone, just drop them in the chat. Otherwise, I might ask also a bit of a question. Well, I know I've been asking all the questions, but maybe Susan, keen to hear just a bit about what was like the most surprising discovery for you in this part of this journey. Like, what was the thing when you look back, was like, oh, that's not what I thought it would be when I initially started. Do you have any of those?
Yeah, there were quite a few surprises. I just thought that knowledge transfer was perhaps a single person's responsibility. But what surprised me and was a common denominator from all these excellent services was the power of the we, the power of the collective. And that power of the collective really built up very, very nicely. It even, in some centers, it included children speaking to it. which was a big surprise. So again, for the listeners, it's not just something you do by yourself. You just have to leverage onto the context again. The context is powerful because people are situated within a context. That was a really good finding. The other one, which I really emphasized for me, was that it just made leadership so simple. Leaders were pivotal. Leaders, really, really good leaders, were pivotal. They were at the heart of it. They had trust, respect, care, love, for their staff, and they were at the heart of it. That was really, really good. And then also the last one, which was I'm gonna call it my last one because there's so many good findings. Um, that ability to wanting to learn of each other. I remember one educator telling me, I always got nervous even singing a song, and she was in the baby's room. I got so nervous. But then so and so next door was so good, and she encouraged me, and we attended this PD together, and now I can't get over it. And this was a very, very humble person. I was like, wow, that's really, really amazing. So a few tips, but again, I'm gonna go back to the minutia of it. Just find out what would work for you in your center. You can get an idea, go unpack it, make sense out of it, and contextualize it. Ask your colleagues, what this would this look like for us if we really wanted to implement it to a very high level of quality? Then layer it with some contextual knowledge, and contextual understanding, and it will come out really good.
Awesome. Thanks, Susan. That's a great reflection. And yeah, Sam, on some tips. They're, I guess, weaved all throughout today, and there's a couple there, but I think, even just some of my takeaways, for me, the most interesting thing or unlocks just for me personally was starting with that vision, taking the time to understand and do that knowledge audit. Where are your strengths? Where are some opportunities? Have a clear goal for how you want PD to come to life. And then looking at aligning those opportunities towards that so it's shared amongst the team. I love that. I love the part on just really being focused on designing a system, and it could be one small practice that you do, but it's trying to bring it as more of a closed loop thing. And I love some of the examples that were shared around having an implementation support practitioner, around building your knowledge reservoir, looking at making learning visible, and putting those certificates up on a wall or having reflections up on a wall. So many good ones. I love the quote, the PD high. And how do you kind of just think about what's one thing they can take away? And that's probably the thing from this. What's one thing you can take away, and just to extend it, not become this sort of thing that was a once-off, or a thing that becomes too big of a project to implement that then people get kind of stifled in how they move forward. So many great takeaways. And if you found that interesting, team, this is Susan's book. Susan, do you want to speak a little bit about this coming out and give people a heads up on what they can find inside?
Yeah, so in this book, you'll find everything that you need to know about putting your professional learning into action. And actually, it's a very, very well written book. It has practical tips, it's got considerations, it just walks you the different stages and some really key takeaways. Very good read. And it's been published. You can order. There is a website there where you can order it, or you can order online. Very simple read. Explicitly designed for our early childhood educators, so that it's not a bulky one. It's a very simple read. So and the proceeds are all going to charity. I'm not making anything out of it. I just want to have this wonderful knowledge accessible to everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan. Well, thank you so much for everyone for joining. We always want to get feedback from these. And we're very grateful to have Susan, be able to have great guests. We're always open to kind of new ideas. So some of our team might reach out just to kind of, hear what your feedback was for us, what's more relevant for you guys as we all go on this learning journey together. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Susan, for yours, and hope everyone found that useful. And go check out Susan's book. She's got so much knowledge to share, and hopefully got a glimpse of that awesome brain and even bigger heart that's in there in an hour. So thanks, Susan.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Cool. Thanks, team. All right. Well,